So this is about changing the subject of a formula, which in other words means swapping it around. So instead of it saying y equals something or other, it says x equals something or other. And x has therefore become the subject of the formula. Now to do this, we will have to unpick the formula, and we'll have to decide which order to unpick the various bits in. And we do that by using the reverse of BODMAS, or if you like, BIDMAS. So if we were working a number out with a power and a multiply and a subtract, we'd go through BIDMAS forwards. We'd do the powers first, then we'd do the multiplications, and then we'd do the subtractions. If we're rearranging a formula, we work in the opposite direction, so like this. For example, if I had to make x the subject of this formula, I've got a multiply and an add here. So as I work in the reverse of BODMAS order, there is nothing being subtracted from the x. There's a 2 being added to the x's, so the first thing I deal with is move that away, and it goes to the other side, so it becomes a -2. And then the only thing that's left is the x's are being multiplied by 3, so I move that to the other side and it divides by 3. Notice it divides the whole of the other side by 3, not just part of it. And that leaves me with x as the subject of this formula. So x is y minus 2 all divided by 3. Next example is slightly more complicated. Try pausing the video there and either in pencil or in rough, see if you can have a go at this one. Okay, so the first thing we would deal with is the subtract that's happening over here. So we move it to the other side and it becomes an add. Now there's nothing being added to the x's, but the 3 is multiplying on this side. So we deal with that next. It goes to the other side, and the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we've got y plus 5 all divided by 3, and that's equal to x squared. So we've got no divisions to worry about. And the next thing I've got to deal with is the power. The opposite of squaring something is square rooting. So the square root of y plus 5 over 3 is equal to x. Third example here, one thing to remember is that a long line in a fraction is the equivalent of a bracket. So what that means is this 5 is dividing the whole of the 3x plus 2, just like the 3 was dividing the whole of the y plus 5. So when we do BODMAS backwards, the first thing we're going to do here actually is get it all onto one line. Okay, so this 3x plus 2 is inside the bracket, so I don't get to deal with opening up the bracket until I've got right the way through everything else first. Then I open up the bracket and then I start again dealing with the inside of the bracket. So everything that's outside the bracket gets dealt with first, then I open up the bracket, then I deal with what was inside the bracket. So if you fancy giving that a try, pause the video here. Okay, so outside of the bracket I've got no subtractions or additions or multiplications, but the bracket is being divided by 5. So the first thing I do is move the 5 to the other side where it becomes a multiply. There's no powers involved, and I open up the bracket. So now I've got to that. Because I've opened up the bracket, I go back to the beginning. Nothing's being subtracted, but a plus 2 is being added, so move that to the other side and it becomes a minus. And then I divide both sides by 3. Now this last example is a very common one, and you're going to get a lot of practice at this. It turns up very frequently in GCSE questions. Slightly different style of question, so we're going to use a marginally different style of solution. So here is our problem here, and we've got a long line, so that's equivalent to this part being in a bracket and that part being in a bracket. So when we have x's on the top and the bottom, the first thing that we don't like is that this problem is on two lines. It's much easier to solve a problem that's on one line, like this one here, for example. So what I'm going to do is take this bracket from the bottom here where it's dividing, move it to the other side where it will be multiplying. So here we are, the x minus 4 has gone to the other side and become a multiply. Now I'm going to multiply this bracket out and tidy up the left hand side. So if I multiply that through, I've got xy minus 4y equals 3x plus 2. Now remember that my ultimate aim is to make x the subject of the equation. At the moment I've got two places where x turns up in this equation. So the next step is always to get everything involving an x on one side, so I'm going to move the 3x across, and everything that doesn't involve an x away from it on the other side, so I'm going to move the minus 4y across. So that takes me to that point there, and this is a very common trick that the examiner likes to play. I've got to leave the equation with x equals something, but at the moment I've got two x's, so I don't know which one of them to make the subject. The solution to this problem is always the same. I use a bracket on this side to get rid of the two x's and turn it into just one x. So if I factorize the left hand side, I've only got one x now, and it's being multiplied by this bracket. So in order to get it on its own, this bracket which is currently multiplying goes to the other side, and the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So it ends up like that. That's the hardest of these questions, and you will get lots of practice at it. But it's worth perhaps going through that video again to remember the steps. Always the same steps come up in always the same order.